The Days I Loved You Most, it's a love story, and it's set along the Connecticut coast. And it tells the story of Joseph and Evelyn, who have been together for their entire lives, when she receives this tragic diagnosis and he decides that he can't live without her and won't live without her. So they make this plan to like take charge of the end of their life and the end of their love story. And I always wanted to write a love story, period. Like I didn't want to write a love story set in something else or absorbed in a different genre. I've always loved any through line of a book. The love story is my favorite part. So I set out to do that. And I wanted to tell a love story from the very beginning to the very end. And that's sort of the genesis of the idea is if you're going to write a love story from the beginning, it has to end. And how do you tell that ending and giving honor to that the beautiful life that these two people have shared? And I think often in love stories, you get the couple gets together and then something pulls them apart and then they get back together and then like end scene. And you don't really see the life that's built. And so I think that's the most beautiful part is the life that's built. And so that's what I tried to capture here. And then I set it on the Connecticut coast you were talking about because I just had a beautiful childhood with my family along this shoreline. And things have changed. We don't own that house anymore. It was my grandmother's house. She's passed. And I wanted to keep that feeling and bottle up that feeling of belonging and belonging not only to a person in a relationship, but belonging to a place and exploring sort of that complicated relationship you can have when you have deep roots. It can be really lovely and really beautiful and to feel like you belong to somewhere, but also it can hold you back and it can keep you sort of strangled in a way. So it's a love story, but it's also a family story. So Joseph and Evelyn present this plan in the very first chapter. So this is not a spoiler. They present this plan to their three children they're grown children who have children of their own. And they say, we're going to take control of the end of our life and we're going to have one final year. And then we're going to end our lives together at the end of this year. And the children are obviously have a lot of very strong feelings about this in very different ways. And their oldest child is Jane, and she feels like complete disbelief. She doesn't believe that this could even be happening. She feels like they're very they sort of have always been very codependent and that this is like an extension of this issue that she's always observed between her parents. And then their middle child is Thomas, and he's angry and he feels like they're being selfish and they're being cowards. And then their youngest is Violet, and she's always idealized her parents' relationship and put it on a pedestal. And so she takes this still as a proof of their like great romance, and then starts to look more critically at her own marriage. So we set the scene with that opening, and then the book is told in the perspective of mostly Joseph and Evelyn in alternating points of view, but you do get their three children and each one gets a chapter, because as much as it is Joseph and Evelyn's story, they don't exist in a vacuum, and they exist in the context of their greater family and how this affects all of them. I mean, when you're writing a book, it spans 60 years. And so when I started writing this, I had never written that except for that one drawer book. I hadn't written something that took on that much of a time period before. And so I didn't really know the best way I didn't like make beats or follow a formula. I just thought, if we're going to cover this span of time, they need to live and exist in the history that surrounds them. So like, what are some big notable events that happened through this time that can sort of be their own beats in a way and that I can write around. And part of what was so helpful about that is these characters do exist inside their relationship, but also in the world that's around them. So you have, like in the 1950s, Evelyn is really struggling with being a wife and mother. And that's a really real story for women in America in the 1950s. There wasn't a lot of options outside of the home. And then in the 60s, you're dealing with things in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, Vietnam War and the fallout of that, and the World War II. And so it really it was sort of a natural progression of, if you're going to be covering these characters' lives, you have to make it more realistic, and you have to put it in around their environment and what affects them not only as individuals but their relationship as well. I'm a method actor version of a writer. I really have to feel what these characters feel, and so I go to the sad place and I like listen to the sad music and I put myself in these shoes. And so much so that when I'm writing these scenes, like my husband will walk by with tissues and hand them to me, and I'm just sobbing through these scenes because I do love these people and I've spent a lot of time with them now. And I just I hate have what I had to do to them along the entire thing from the very beginning with no spoilers. that she's sick. I hate that that had to happen. And then all of the things that they deal with through the whole book. And so there was a lot of very emotional writing for me. It was really hard, but at the same time, I will say, not a spoiler, but the ending has changed since my original ending. So I had actually written a completely different ending, and then along the way, I worked with an editor who made a case, and it was the right case to change it. And I'm so glad, I'm so happy with the ending now. I think readers are very satisfied with the ending.